The roar of 50,000 voices echoes through the marble corridors of the Colosseum, but this is not the sound of entertainment. This is the sound of religious ecstasy mixed with bloodlust. In the heart of ancient Rome, what we today call festivals were actually elaborate ceremonies where human sacrifice, mass executions, and ritualistic violence were not just accepted, but considered sacred duties to the gods. While modern festivals celebrate music, food, and culture, Roman festivals celebrated death itself. The Ludi Romani, the Saturnalia, the Lupercalia, these were not mere celebrations but carefully orchestrated displays of divine appeasement through human suffering. What happened during these events was so extreme, so systematically brutal, that even the Romans themselves began to question whether they had gone too far. The blood that stained the sand of Roman arenas was not spilled for sport alone. Every drop was an offering, every scream a prayer, every death a transaction with gods who demanded increasingly savage tributes. These festivals transformed ordinary citizens into participants in mass rituals that would define the very soul of the empire for over 1,000 years. The truth about these celebrations reveals something disturbing about human nature itself. How quickly civilization can slip into organized savagery when wrapped in religious tradition and imperial glory. The festivals of Rome were not anomalies or exceptions to Roman culture. They were the beating heart of it, pumping violence through every level of society from the humblest slave to the emperor himself. But these were not random acts of cruelty. Every festival followed ancient rules, every ritual had precise meanings, and every act of violence served a specific purpose in maintaining the delicate balance between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. The Romans believed that without these regular offerings of human life, their empire would collapse, their crops would fail, and their enemies would overwhelm them. Before we dive deeper into this dark chapter of human history, I want to make a quick invitation. If you're new to the channel and want to follow more content like this, subscribe and click like to help the channel grow. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing quality content to you. Now, let's return to the blood-soaked streets of ancient Rome. The most shocking aspect of these festivals was not their brutality, but how completely they had woven themselves into the fabric of Roman identity. Children grew up watching public executions as casually as they might watch street performers. Mothers brought their families to witness mass crucifixions as educational experiences. Senators debated not whether these festivals should continue, but how to make them even more spectacular. But to understand how an entire civilization could normalize such extreme violence, we must journey back to the very foundations of Rome and meet the men who transformed simple harvest celebrations into engines of systematic human sacrifice. The story begins not with emperors or gladiators, but with a group of desperate refugees who would build their new city upon a foundation of blood that would never fully dry. 7 hills rise from the marshy banks of the Tiber River in the year 753 before Christ, and on the largest of these hills, a young man named Romulus draws a sacred boundary in the earth with his bronze plow. This furrow, blessed by Etruscan priests and marked with the blood of sacrificed oxen, will become the Pomerium, the religious boundary of Rome. But even in this founding moment, violence erupts when Romulus kills his own twin brother Remus for mockingly jumping over the sacred line. The first blood spilled in Rome's name is fraternal blood, and it sets a pattern that will echo through centuries. The early Romans are not yet the sophisticated conquerors of history. They are hill farmers, shepherds, and desperate refugees from across the Italian peninsula who have gathered under Romulus's protection. Their gods are not the refined deities of later Roman literature, but hungry, primitive spirits who demand constant appeasement. Mars is not a noble god of war, but a savage deity of slaughter who must be fed blood to ensure the survival of crops and cattle. Terminus, the god of boundaries, requires human sacrifice to mark territorial claims. Even Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, accepts the burned flesh of enemy captives as sacred offerings. These early festivals begin simply enough. The Robigalia, celebrated every April 25th, starts as a humble ceremony to protect grain crops from disease. Farmers gather outside the city walls to sacrifice a red dog and a sheep to Robigus, the god of agricultural blight. But as Rome grows more powerful and acquires more enemies, the festival transforms. By the 4th century before Christ, captured enemy soldiers are being burned alive in massive bonfires, their screams believed to carry prayers directly to Robigus. The smoke from their burning flesh is considered especially potent protection against crop failure. The transformation of the Lupercalia reveals how quickly Roman religious practices could evolve toward extreme violence. Originally a simple purification ritual held every February 15th, young Roman men would run naked through the streets, striking women with strips of goat hide to promote fertility. But under King Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome, the festival expands dramatically. Captured enemies are brought to the Lupercal Cave where Romulus and Remus were supposedly nursed by a wolf. Here, prisoners are skinned alive, and their fresh hides are used to make the fertility strips. The belief develops that the more recently the skin has been removed from a living body, the more potent its life-giving properties. By the reign of the Etruscan kings in the 6th century before Christ, Roman festivals have become elaborate displays of ritualized death. King Tarquinius Superbus introduces the practice of mass crucifixions during the Ides of Mars, believing that the prolonged agony of dying enemies will please Mars and ensure Roman victory in future battles. Hundreds of captured Sabines, Latins, and Volscians are nailed to wooden crosses arranged in perfect geometric patterns across the Campus Martius. The festival goers walk among the dying men, offering prayers and leaving small offerings of bread and wine beneath each cross. The religious reasoning behind this brutality is complex and deeply ingrained in Roman thinking. The Romans believe their city exists in a precarious balance between order and chaos, between the favor and wrath of the gods. Every enemy defeated in battle is not just a military victory but a religious obligation. These captives represent chaos itself. Foreign gods, foreign customs, foreign blood that must be purified or destroyed to maintain Roman sacred order. Their deaths are not murders but sacred transformations, changing chaotic foreign elements into divine energy that strengthens Rome itself. The priestly class, particularly the College of Pontiffs, develops increasingly sophisticated theologies to justify and expand these practices. They teach that the gods measure devotion not by prayer or offerings alone, but by the willingness to sacrifice what is most precious, human life. The more valuable the sacrifice, the greater the divine favor. Enemy kings are worth more than common soldiers. Beautiful young captives are worth more than old ones. The elaborate ranking systems that develop around human sacrifice become as complex as Roman law itself. But it is during the festival of the Ludi Romani that these practices reach their most sophisticated and horrifying form. Originally established in 366 before Christ to honor Jupiter, the festival begins as simple chariot races and theatrical performances. But as Roman military conquests expand, captured enemies from across the Mediterranean begin arriving in Rome as living trophies. The priesthood declares that Jupiter desires not just entertainment, but demonstration of Roman supremacy through the ritualized destruction of Rome's enemies. The evolution of gladiatorial combat emerges from this religious imperative. The first gladiator fights are not entertainment but human sacrifices performed at funerals of prominent Romans. The belief develops that the spirit of a recently deceased Roman noble requires the life force of dying enemies to successfully journey to the underworld. Initially, these fights involve only 2 or 3 pairs of captives forced to kill each other over the grave of the deceased. But as the practice gains religious significance, the numbers expand dramatically. By the late Republic, the Ludi Romani features hundreds of gladiators fighting simultaneously in elaborate scenarios designed to recreate famous Roman victories. The sand of the arena is carefully prepared with sacred herbs and blessed by priests before each day's combat. Every death is accompanied by specific rituals. The fallen gladiator's blood is collected in sacred vessels, his organs are examined for divine omens, and his body is dragged away by attendants dressed as Charon, the ferryman of the underworld. The crowd's cheers and jeers are not mere entertainment reactions but religious responses, their emotions offering psychic energy to feed the hungry gods. What makes these festivals particularly disturbing is how they transform ordinary Roman citizens into active participants in ritualized killing. Children as young as 5 years old attend these events as part of their education, learning to associate violence with religious devotion and civic duty. Young Roman men compete for the honor of delivering killing blows to wounded gladiators, believing that taking a life during a sacred festival will bring them good fortune in their own endeavors. Women collect the blood of dying captives in small vials, using it later in fertility rituals and love magic. But the most shocking aspect of these early festivals is how completely they integrate violence into every aspect of Roman social life. Marriage ceremonies include the sacrifice of captured enemies to ensure fertility. Business partnerships are sealed with the shared killing of foreign captives. Political agreements are sanctified by mass executions performed in specific ritual patterns. Even children's coming-of-age ceremonies require them to participate in the killing of captives, marking their transition from innocent youth to full citizens capable of holy violence. The psychological impact on Roman society is profound and lasting. Generations of Romans grow up understanding that their prosperity, their security, and their very identity as Romans depends on their willingness to kill foreigners in religious contexts. This creates a culture where extreme violence is not just normalized but sanctified, where mercy toward enemies is seen as betrayal of the gods, and where the most pious acts involve the most brutal killings. But what no one expects is that these sacred traditions of human sacrifice will eventually spiral beyond all control, creating festivals so extreme that they will threaten the very stability of the Roman state and force emperors to choose between their gods and their empire. The year 49 after Christ marks a turning point in the brutal evolution of Roman festivals when Emperor Claudius ascends to power with a disturbing obsession. Unlike his predecessors who viewed mass killing during festivals as religious necessity, Claudius sees these events as opportunities for unprecedented spectacle that will cement his legacy as the most magnificent ruler in Roman history. But his ambitions will transform sacred rituals into something so monstrous that even hardened Roman citizens begin to whisper that their emperor has gone too far. Claudius begins his reign by expanding the traditional Ludi Seculares, a festival held once every century to mark the renewal of Roman power. Previous celebrations involved the sacrifice of hundreds of captives over several days. Claudius decides that his version will sacrifice thousands. He orders his legions to capture enemies alive specifically for the festival, leading to a new type of warfare where Roman soldiers are rewarded not for killing enemies in battle, but for bringing them back to Rome alive for ritual slaughter. The logistics of managing thousands of captives for sacrifice create entirely new industries within Roman society. Professional captive trainers emerge who specialize in keeping prisoners healthy and strong enough to provide spectacular deaths during festivals. Captive markets develop where wealthy Romans can purchase specific types of prisoners for private sacrificial ceremonies. A complex classification system evolves that ranks captives by their potential entertainment value. Germanic warriors are prized for their size and strength, Gallic chieftains for their proud defiance, British druids for their exotic religious practices that can be mockingly recreated before their execution. During Claudius's enhanced Ludi Seculares in 47 after Christ, the festival expands to 2 full weeks of continuous killing. Each day features different themes of execution designed to recreate famous Roman victories. Monday becomes Conquest of Gaul Day, where captured Gauls are forced to reenact their own defeats before being crucified. Tuesday transforms into Britannia Subdued Day, featuring elaborate mock battles where British captives fight with dulled weapons against fully armed gladiators. Wednesday through Friday focus on Germanic tribes, with prisoners forced to fight wild animals while crowds cheer for the beasts. But it is the introduction of the living tableaus that represents the most disturbing innovation of Claudius's reign. These elaborate staged scenes force captives to reenact mythological stories where gods triumph over mortals, with the captives playing the mortals who must actually die as part of the performance. Hundreds of prisoners are dressed as the Titans and literally burned alive to represent their mythological defeat by Jupiter. Others are forced to play Icarus, with their arms bound to wooden wings before being thrown from great heights onto sharpened stakes below. The psychological manipulation involved in these tableaus reveals the sophisticated cruelty that Roman festival organizers have developed. Captives are often given false hope of survival if they perform their roles convincingly, leading them to participate enthusiastically in their own destruction. Children of captured leaders are threatened with torture unless their parents die with appropriate dramatic flair. Pregnant women are promised that their unborn children will be spared if they can make their own deaths sufficiently entertaining for the crowds. Emperor Nero ascends to power in 54 after Christ and immediately begins competing with Claudius's legacy by introducing the concept of themed festivals, where entire captured populations are forced to recreate their own destruction. The most notorious of these occurs in 64 after Christ during the festival known as the Great Fire Games, supposedly celebrating Rome's recovery from the devastating fire that destroyed much of the city. Nero orders that captured Christians be used as human torches to illuminate the evening festivities, their oil-soaked bodies providing light for gladiatorial combats that continue deep into the night. The Christian persecution during Nero's festivals represents a new development in Roman ritual violence, the targeting of specific religious groups whose beliefs are seen as threats to traditional Roman gods. Unlike previous festivals that primarily featured captured foreign soldiers, Nero's events specifically hunt down Roman citizens whose only crime is practicing Christianity. These persecutions transform festivals from celebrations of military victory into tools of religious warfare, using spectacular public death to terrorize any Romans who might consider abandoning traditional gods. The methods of execution during Nero's Christian persecution festivals become increasingly elaborate and symbolically charged. Christians are sewn into animal skins and thrown to wild dogs, representing their supposed transformation into beasts through their foreign religion. Others are crucified in arrangements that mockingly recreate Christian religious imagery, with Roman priests providing sarcastic commentary that frames the executions as divine comedy. The most theatrical executions involve forcing Christians to reenact their own religious stories, but with fatal endings that demonstrate the powerlessness of their god compared to Roman deities. But the escalation of festival violence creates unexpected problems for Roman society. The constant demand for fresh captives begins straining military resources as legions spend more time capturing prisoners than conquering new territories. The enormous cost of feeding and housing thousands of captives year-round creates budget crises that force emperors to raise taxes on Roman citizens. Most significantly, the normalization of extreme violence begins affecting civilian behavior, with ordinary crimes becoming more brutal as citizens apply festival techniques to personal disputes. The emergence of copycat festivals in Roman provinces reveals how completely these violent practices have spread throughout the empire. Local governors begin organizing their own mass execution events, supposedly to honor the emperor but actually to eliminate local political enemies and troublesome populations. These provincial festivals often lack the religious oversight of Roman events, leading to chaotic killing sprees that serve no ritual purpose and provide no sacred benefit. The line between holy sacrifice and mass murder becomes increasingly blurred. The reign of Emperor Caligula from 37 to 41 after Christ introduces the most psychologically disturbing element to Roman festivals: the systematic involvement of the imperial family in direct killing. Previous emperors had presided over festivals but rarely participated in actual executions. Caligula personally strangles captives during religious ceremonies, forces his sisters to participate in ritual killings, and requires senators to demonstrate their loyalty by taking turns executing prisoners with their own hands during state festivals. Caligula's most notorious innovation is the family sacrifice festivals, where entire captured families are killed in specific orders designed to maximize psychological torment. Children are forced to watch their parents die slowly over several days. Then teenagers are killed while younger siblings watch, with the youngest children saved for last so they experience maximum terror before their own deaths. Caligula claims these elaborate murder sequences generate more powerful spiritual energy than simple mass executions, and he requires detailed written reports on the facial expressions and final words of each victim. The religious justification for these escalating practices becomes increasingly sophisticated under the influence of imperial philosophers and court intellectuals. They develop complex theories about spiritual hierarchy that rank different types of human sacrifice according to their religious value. The death of a captured king provides more divine energy than the death of a common soldier. The death of a young virgin provides more spiritual power than an older woman. The death of someone who dies in terror generates different divine benefits than someone who dies bravely. These theological developments lead to the creation of harvest festivals, specifically designed to gather particular types of spiritual energy for specific purposes. The victory harvest requires the death of exactly 100 captured enemy commanders to ensure success in future military campaigns. The fertility harvest demands the sacrifice of young couples from conquered territories to guarantee good crop yields. The wisdom harvest involves the ritual killing of captured enemy priests and scholars, with their blood used to bless Roman libraries and schools. But the most disturbing aspect of this period is how these extreme festivals begin attracting volunteer participants from Roman society itself. Desperate citizens facing bankruptcy, disease, or social disgrace begin volunteering to die in festivals, believing that sacrificial death will elevate their souls and benefit their families. Terminally ill Romans request the honor of dying during religious ceremonies instead of wasting away from disease. Even some Roman nobles begin viewing sacrificial death as the ultimate expression of devotion to the state and gods. The infrastructure required to support these massive festivals transforms Rome itself into a city designed around ritualized killing. Entire neighborhoods develop around captive housing, with specialized buildings for different types of prisoners. Underground tunnel systems are constructed to move thousands of condemned people efficiently from holding areas to execution sites. Professional burial crews work around the clock to dispose of bodies, while specialized craftsmen create increasingly elaborate execution devices designed to prolong suffering while maintaining religious symbolism. However, what is about to unfold during the reigns of the Flavian emperors will make all previous festivals seem restrained by comparison, as the construction of the Colosseum creates possibilities for mass ritualized killing that will push Roman festival culture beyond any conceivable limit and ultimately force the empire to confront the monster it has created. The year 72 after Christ witnesses the beginning of construction on the most ambitious project in Roman history. Not a temple, not a palace, but a massive arena specifically designed to facilitate the industrial-scale killing of human beings for religious purposes. Emperor Vespasian announces that the Flavian Amphitheater, later known as the Colosseum, will host festivals so magnificent that they will prove Roman superiority over all other civilizations throughout history. But what Vespasian cannot foresee is that his monument to Roman power will become the stage for events so extreme that they will ultimately contribute to the empire's spiritual and moral collapse. The opening games of the Colosseum in 80 after Christ under Emperor Titus represent the pinnacle of Roman festival brutality and the beginning of its end. For 100 consecutive days, an estimated 11,000 animals and 10,000 human beings die in carefully choreographed spectacles that push the boundaries of what organized killing can achieve. But these are not random acts of violence. They are the culmination of centuries of religious development, the final evolution of Roman sacred practice into something that transcends both religion and entertainment to become pure ritualized destruction. The scale of planning required for the inaugural games reveals how completely Roman civilization has reorganized itself around festival killing. Entire provinces are scoured for exotic animals that will provide appropriate challenges for different categories of human sacrifice. Lions from Africa, bears from Germania, crocodiles from Egypt, and elephants from Asia are transported across the empire in specially designed ships and wagons. The logistics of feeding and housing this menagerie require the establishment of permanent facilities that employ thousands of Romans whose full-time job is preparing animals to kill people during religious ceremonies. But it is the human component of these games that demonstrates the true extremity of Roman festival culture. The 10,000 condemned prisoners represent not just captives from recent military campaigns, but the result of systematic harvesting operations conducted across the empire specifically to gather sacrificial victims. Roman agents operate in every province, identifying and capturing individuals who meet specific criteria for different types of ritual death. The old, the young, the beautiful, the deformed, the brave, the cowardly. Each category serves a different religious purpose during the games. The inauguration features the first Total Conquest Festival, a new type of ceremony designed to demonstrate complete Roman dominance over the known world. Representatives from every nation that Rome has ever fought are forced to participate in elaborate recreations of their own defeats, but with a horrifying twist. The scenarios are designed so that every single participant dies, leaving no survivors to carry word of Roman mercy or weakness back to their homelands. The message is clear: resistance to Rome does not merely result in defeat, but in the complete eradication of your people from existence. The most psychologically sophisticated of these inaugural spectacles is the Divine Judgment Festival, where captured foreign priests and religious leaders are forced to call upon their gods for salvation while facing certain death. The Roman audience watches as Egyptian priests pray to Isis while being slowly eaten by crocodiles, as Germanic druids call upon forest spirits while being burned alive in specially constructed tree-shaped pyres, as Jewish rabbis recite their scriptures while being torn apart by wild beasts. The silence of foreign gods in the face of these torments is presented as proof of Roman divine superiority. Emperor Domitian, the youngest of the Flavian dynasty, ascends to power in 81 after Christ and immediately begins planning what he calls the Ultimate Festival, a celebration designed to surpass not just all previous Roman festivals, but all conceivable festivals throughout human history. Domitian's vision involves the simultaneous killing of 50,000 people over a single week, with each day featuring different methods of execution that will demonstrate Roman mastery over every form of death that human imagination can devise. The preparation for Domitian's Ultimate Festival requires the construction of entirely new infrastructure within and around the Colosseum. Underground chambers are expanded to house unprecedented numbers of condemned prisoners. New types of lifting mechanisms are developed to raise larger and more complex execution devices into the arena. Special drainage systems are installed to handle the massive quantities of blood that will be generated. Most disturbing of all, a new class of Roman professionals emerges: death engineers, who specialize in designing execution methods that are simultaneously spectacular, religiously meaningful, and efficient enough to process thousands of victims in a single day. But the Ultimate Festival reveals something unexpected about the limits of human capacity for organized violence. As the killing begins, even the most hardened Roman spectators begin experiencing what court physicians describe as spectacle sickness, a condition where witnesses to extreme violence begin suffering physical and mental breakdown from prolonged exposure to mass death. Audience members vomit uncontrollably, faint in large numbers, and some suffer what appear to be permanent psychological damage from watching thousands of people die in increasingly creative ways. More significantly, the participants themselves, the Roman citizens and officials organizing the festival, begin showing signs of severe psychological distress. Gladiator trainers refuse to continue working with condemned prisoners, claiming that the sheer scale of killing has stripped away any remaining sense that their work serves a religious purpose. Even the priests conducting the ceremonies begin questioning whether gods who demand such massive offerings of human life are actually divine beings or something far more sinister. The Ultimate Festival becomes the first Roman festival in history to be terminated early due to popular revulsion. On the fourth day, with approximately 28,000 people already dead, crowds begin leaving the Colosseum in large numbers. Some spectators actively protest the continuation of the games, demanding that the remaining prisoners be executed quickly and privately rather than subjected to further torture for public entertainment. Even more shocking, groups of Roman soldiers refuse orders to continue participating in the executions, claiming that the gods themselves are showing displeasure through various omens and portents. The psychological aftermath of the ultimate festival spreads throughout Roman society like a spiritual plague. Citizens who attended the early days report persistent nightmares, inability to eat meat, and overwhelming feelings of guilt and contamination. Priests at temples across Rome report unprecedented numbers of citizens seeking purification rituals to cleanse themselves of the spiritual pollution they feel from witnessing excessive killing. Most significantly, military recruitment begins declining dramatically as young Roman men express reluctance to serve in armies that might require them to capture prisoners for future festivals. But the most profound impact occurs within the imperial palace itself. Emperor Domitian begins experiencing what court physicians describe as divine madness. Extended periods where he claims to be receiving direct communications from the gods expressing their displeasure with the direction of Roman festival culture. He speaks of visions where Mars himself appears to demand an end to mass human sacrifice, claiming that the gods have become oversaturated with human blood and now require different forms of worship. The crisis deepens when similar reports begin arriving from across the empire. Provincial governors describe widespread refusal among local populations to participate in traditional festivals involving human sacrifice. Military commanders report difficulty finding volunteers for captive-taking missions. Most disturbing of all, reports arrive of entire legions experiencing collective visions where Roman gods appear to forbid further ritual killing, threatening divine punishment if the practices continue. The investigation into these supernatural manifestations reveals something that shakes the foundations of Roman religious belief. Temple records spanning centuries show a clear pattern of increasing divine demands for human sacrifice, with the gods seemingly requiring larger and more elaborate offerings each year. But careful analysis of the progression suggests that what Romans have interpreted as divine communication may actually be something else entirely, a form of spiritual addiction where exposure to extreme violence creates an insatiable hunger for even greater extremes. The revelation that emerges from this investigation is so disturbing that it is initially suppressed by the imperial government. Roman priests and scholars conclude that their festival practices have not been feeding the gods at all, but have instead been feeding something darker, a form of spiritual entity that grows stronger with each act of ritualized violence and demands ever-increasing offerings of human suffering. The realization that centuries of Roman religious practice may have been directed toward malevolent forces rather than protective gods creates a crisis of faith that threatens the very foundations of Roman civilization. The discovery of evidence suggesting that other civilizations throughout history have fallen into similar cycles of escalating ritual violence provides additional cause for alarm. Archaeological investigations reveal that the Carthaginians, the Celts, and numerous other cultures that Rome has conquered all experienced similar progressions from simple religious sacrifice to massive organized killing, often shortly before their civilizations collapsed or were conquered by others. The pattern suggests that what Romans believed was their unique divine favor may actually be a recurring historical trap that destroys cultures from within. The final shock comes when Roman scholars discover hidden records suggesting that some of the most devastating military defeats in Roman history occurred immediately after periods of particularly intense festival activity. The correlation between massive human sacrifice and subsequent military disasters implies that the entities being fed by these rituals may not be supporting Roman power but actively undermining it, using Roman religious devotion as a weapon against Rome itself. These revelations force Emperor Domitian and his advisors to confront an impossible choice that will determine the future of Roman civilization and reveal whether an empire built on ritualized violence can find a way to break free from the spiritual trap it has created for itself. The transformation of Roman festivals from simple harvest celebrations to industrial-scale human sacrifice represents one of history's most disturbing examples of how quickly civilized societies can normalize extreme violence when it is wrapped in religious tradition and imperial glory. What began as desperate refugees offering small sacrifices to ensure their survival evolved over 8 centuries into a culture so addicted to ritualized killing that it ultimately threatened the spiritual foundations of the empire itself. The psychological mechanisms that allowed ordinary Roman citizens to participate in and celebrate mass murder reveal unsettling truths about human nature that extend far beyond ancient history. The gradual escalation from individual executions to thousands of deaths in single festivals demonstrates how exposure to violence creates tolerance that demands ever-increasing extremes to achieve the same psychological impact. The Romans who cheered for mass crucifixions were not inherently more cruel than people today. They were the products of a system that had slowly trained them to associate violence with virtue, death with devotion, and suffering with sacred purpose. The religious justifications that Roman priests developed to sanctify these practices show how easily spiritual beliefs can be manipulated to serve political and social control. By framing human sacrifice as divine necessity rather than imperial choice, Roman leaders created a system where questioning the morality of mass killing became tantamount to religious heresy. Citizens who might have objected to murder could be convinced to participate in sacred execution, believing they were serving higher purposes while satisfying darker impulses. The ultimate recognition that these festivals may have been feeding malevolent entities rather than benevolent gods represents a profound spiritual crisis that forced Rome to confront the possibility that centuries of religious practice had been fundamentally misdirected. The discovery that ritualized violence might actually weaken rather than strengthen the empire challenged every assumption about the relationship between sacrifice and divine favor that had guided Roman culture since its founding. The historical parallels between Roman festival evolution and similar patterns in other ancient civilizations suggest that the cycle of escalating ritual violence may be a recurring trap that threatens all human societies under certain conditions. The Carthaginian practice of child sacrifice, the Celtic tradition of mass drowning rituals, and the Aztec obsession with heart extraction all follow similar progressions from moderate religious observance to civilization-threatening extremism. Rome's experience serves as a warning about how quickly sacred traditions can transform into destructive obsessions. The eventual decline of Roman festival culture following Domitian's reign represents one of history's rare examples of a civilization successfully stepping back from the brink of spiritual self-destruction. The gradual replacement of human sacrifice with animal offerings, gladiatorial games with theatrical performances, and death-focused rituals with life-affirming celebrations required tremendous courage from leaders willing to break with centuries of tradition in order to save their civilization's soul. The legacy of Roman festival brutality extends far beyond the fall of the empire itself. The psychological techniques developed to normalize extreme violence, the religious arguments used to justify mass killing, and the social structures that made ordinary citizens complicit in systematic murder have reappeared throughout history in various forms. Understanding how Rome created and eventually escaped from its culture of ritualized violence provides crucial insights for recognizing and resisting similar patterns in contemporary societies. The physical remnants of these festivals, the Colosseum, the preserved gladiatorial equipment, the artistic depictions of mass executions, serve as monuments to humanity's capacity for both extraordinary cruelty and ultimate redemption. They remind us that civilizations are not defined by their darkest moments but by their ability to recognize moral error and choose different paths forward, even when those paths require abandoning traditions that once seemed sacred and immutable. The story of Rome's most brutal festivals ultimately becomes a story about the possibility of moral progress, about societies learning to distinguish between authentic spiritual practice and destructive religious obsession. It demonstrates that even cultures that have fallen deepest into cycles of violence can find their way back to more humane forms of civilization, provided they possess the courage to examine their traditions honestly and the wisdom to change course when examination reveals fundamental errors in their approach to the sacred. The truth about Rome's most brutal festivals is not just that they happened, but that Rome eventually found the strength to stop them, proving that no society is permanently trapped by its worst impulses and that redemption remains possible even for civilizations that have traveled furthest down the path of ritualized destruction. Stories like these show us that the past is more alive than we imagine, and each historical revelation teaches us something crucial about the patterns that shape human civilization. If you made it this far and haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe now, hit the like button, and share in the comments your thoughts about how societies can recognize when their traditions have gone too far. And until the next video,